Hi, I'm Chris Browne. I am a CG supervisor on Dragon Prince. I am responsible for the pipeline and technical tools, lighting and compositing, and overseeing the assets and the workflow. Today I'm going to talk about how we build some of the environments for the show and the different techniques involved to sort of achieve what the showrunner and director is after, and also build them in economic ways that allows us to build them quickly on a fast television pipeline and achieve this cinematic look that we're going for. So there are several different types of environments that we built for the show, different styles. They all end up having the same sort of look, or should have the same appeal that suits the whole style of the series, but they're built in different ways depending on how they're being used. So one of the techniques would be building a 3D environment made up of 2D cards. So here you'll see in the gray, those are 3D models that we built, like a traditional 3D set, but we populated it with a lot of two-dimensional cards throughout the 3D environment. So this allowed us to take elements from matte paintings that the artist from the design team has created. We project those onto cards, and then we build that out three-dimensionally with the 3D geometry, so it's sort of a amalgamation of the two techniques. So this gave us the depth and the freedom to move the camera around. Only in certain angles you can see some of the cheating, or some of the areas where the cards don't hold up 100%, but we created tools that if a camera happens to go on an angle where you see a card sort of parallel to the camera and it looks flat, our tools will orient them to camera so that they can pose the camera and still see the cards in the environment and have everything work. Another technique that we use is somewhat similar, except the environment is made entirely up of these cards, and we actually extruded them out three-dimensionally to build the set. So this is even sort of more simplified because we're not building the 3D geometry, but we're actually taking the 2D planes and making some three-dimensional depth to them. This environment does have 3D depth to it, but it's pretty much all of the detail has been painted in two-dimensionally and been projected on three-dimensional extrusions. And you'll see once you pull all the way up, it doesn't quite hold up, but of course we'll never have a camera angle from that extreme. And if we did, we would either do it as a separate paint over, or we would build more detail into the environment to achieve that angle. Because there was so many environments to travel through in this series, every episode there could be several completely new environments, and to constantly build those it's a lot of work. It's a really massive scale. So we found that using some of these techniques not only kept with the look of the series, but also gave us a ability to crank out sets very quickly and also have the freedom to move the camera around. So you notice this is what the final shot would look like. You've got a camera pulling through a mountainside. You've got lava coming down, and you could see, okay, well, it feels like the camera can go anywhere. It feels very 3D in the scope of where you can travel, but the style still feels like it's got that 2D cartoon look, but very stylized. So we get sort of the best of both worlds. And when you really pull the camera back and you look from a different angle, you'll see all it is just two-dimensional planes laid out three-dimensionally in very sort of interesting ways. Some of those planes are sculpted, and you get the feeling like you are traveling over a real environment that has depth. And often we'll even paint in lighting effects onto the cards, because we're not going to be lighting the cards. We have a very stylistic approach to it, so we often will paint in the lighting effects on those cards, and then the 3D characters would have lighting on them, and it would take we'd have a lot of different techniques to integrate them and make them work together as one. So again, those two shots are custom shots, so that means we don't have to build this massive environment where the camera can look anywhere. We know from the storyboard stage that it's only going to be a one-off shot where the camera's traveling in one direction, so we just build exactly what we need to for the view of that camera. And because we're under such a time constraint, we basically only build what is in frame. Anything that's outside of the frame, it's non-existent. So you see here you're traveling through a landscape, but as soon as you pull out to what the camera won't be seeing, there's nothing there. So it's just depth with cards and a little bit of atmosphere effects and the sky and a map painting in the background. And then of course there was also your traditional two-dimensional backgrounds, but even then we added some depth. So this is a very traditional technique. It's called multiplaning, where it's one matte painting but split up into 3 levels of depth, and each of those layers of depth are brought out in 3D space. So when you push the camera in, it adds a little more life to the shot when you can do that, as opposed to just pushing in on a flat painting. Here's another environment where it's entirely a matte painting, but we take different layers of that matte painting and we work with them in compositing to integrate characters and shadows into those environments. Here's another example of just simple card layers with depth added to it, with a very simple camera move pushing in, but just enough depth to feel like there's an environment that exists there. And since we are using the matte painting from the design team, we're staying true to the overall look and feel of the show. We did often do full 3D environments as well. There's instances where characters are running through environments, or they're interacting in these massive action scenes with cameras flying through, and we just had to simply build everything out in 3D so that we can accommodate all the action that's taking place. So in order to do that, we had to be very careful with how we painted the textures, so that the texture mattes had a painterly sort of feel to them that matched the matte paintings and the overall look of the show. Another technique that we use to stick with that sort of whole approach is, if there was a matte painting, so we didn't build any environment at all, it was just a quick shot, or the characters are walking down a path and it's a quick take but a very highly detailed environment, what we would do is what we call the proxy paint over, where we would, in 3D, before the designers even paint the matte painting, we would build with 3D geometry very basic shapes of what the environment would include. If they were to just paint it from scratch, then it would be an artist's interpretation of what the perspective was and what the fall-off point was. So if you had a 3D character composited over an incorrect perspective, you'd have a character walking down a path, and by the time they get to the end of the path, they could be massive compared to the trees that receded tiny in the distance. But if they painted it over actual 3D geometry, we know that perspectives will also always work, and we know that when they cast a shadow on the environment, when they're walking through that matte painting, the shadow will actually conform to the landscape that they're walking on. We are taking the stylistic look that you would get from a 2D show, but because we're building these 3D environments, we have the freedom to have action take place anywhere and move the camera wherever, as long as it still fit with the style and look.